Okay, you mentioned Jafar Deva. Was he your maternal grandfather?
No, he wasn't my grandfather. He was a great uncle. Great uncle from my grandmother, Sabriye. Sabriye was raised by Jafar Deva's father, Ibrahim Deva. Don't understand or never been told why that was the case, but she was raised as his daughter. And so, as long as I've lived and wherever I go, people talk about Sabriye, the grandmother I never knew, but for whom I have the deepest respect, was his sister. In fact, she was his cousin. But I consider myself Jafar Deva's great niece. That's the relationship with Jafar Deva. I never met him. I never spoke with him. But interesting enough, he's very present in my life, and I keep having to explain the relationship. I've often said, and this sort of summarizes it, I will not be his lawyer, but I'm very careful about who I allow to be his judge. That's my position about Jafar Deva. Yeah. It's a complicated relationship. It has a lot of weight, and sometimes surprisingly, because it is a paradox, I never met him. He was so far away from me, and yet he has so much weight in my life when I'm in contact with Kosovo.
Still
Still
now?
today, oh yes. Do you know, when my husband decided to marry me, well, the story's lovely, but we met very quickly. We decided very quickly to marry.
Where did you meet?
I beg your pardon?
Where did you meet?
We met in New York. We met in in November 1977, and 3 days later, after I met him, we were engaged to be married. And he returned to Europe, and he introduced me to his father, not as Dervish Mitrovica's, granddaughter and Jalal Mitrovica's daughter. He introduced me as Jafar Deva's niece. And over the years after I got married, when I came to live here in Belgium, and I encountered the sort of patriarchy which I had never encountered before, the weight of the misogyny was incredibly heavy. Sometimes remembering that Idris introduced me as Jafar Deva's niece came in very handy, because sometimes it kind of, forgive me putting it bluntly, but it shut the men up. I had power because of that relationship, and sometimes I used it. I have one interesting and very funny occasion. We were just me in a room of men, as happened very often. And they were talking about Kosovo issues. This was the 1980s, and we'd been deeply implicated in creating, first of all, a pedagogical, informational kind of activity here to inform, to teach, the wider Belgian public where Kosovo was and what the issues were, but also influence policy by going to the European Parliament, forcing a first resolution and so on. I knew what I was talking about. And here I am in the room with these men who are dismissing me, ignoring me. And anytime I had something to say, they would sort of grumble that, oh, there she goes again, And at one point, Idris realized that I was going to blow, because there were times when I would get really annoyed. And so to calm things down, he said, oh, by the way, just so you know, this is Kimete, is Jafar Deva's niece. And the very same men who dismissive and openly disdainful of me suddenly became the most effusively servile, feeding me, coming up and cutting the chicken for me and so on. It was ridiculous. So sometimes it came in handy to have that male power to defend me, And sometimes cynically you use it. Why not, Anyway. Did I forget the question?
Yeah. Can we backtrack just a little bit, because we talked about your father and your relationship with him. Or what about your mother? all those children, and
Yes.
and also for her the exile, the experience of exile.
Yes. My mother was a woman of great resilience. Truly, she was a model. She wasn't an easy woman. She was, let me just try to sum her up. I think my mother had lived her early life through war, and that had marked her, made her distrustful, made her very private, very closed, things you don't say, things you don't do. She was devoted to her father, and in some ways I think loved him more than she loved anything else in the world, including us. But she loved us like a tiger loves. She had a protective streak that was sometimes even violent. She was capable of excess. But she was probably the most loyal woman. She was a good partner for my father. She knew how to fight. She knew how to survive. And in these circumstances of exile and poverty, she confronted them with courage and strength. She had a terrible accident. Her back was damaged badly. She had to undergo several very difficult operations when we were very young. And they told her that she would never walk again. Well, she walked again. She got up and she walked again. That's how strong she was, kind of psychologically. Then she's 48 years old, and she's left with 6 children at home. My older sister was married by then. My father died with terrible cancer and died within a year after being diagnosed, and she took up the battle. She when he died, I think she had a year of great suffering and loneliness and struggle emotionally, psychologically, but she came back and she raised us, and she did what she had to do to continue the work that my father started with her, which was the common theme in our home: we will take you into the light, Dytë, And so she did that on her own. So when my father died, I was the only one who at university level. My sister had done a library degree, and she was, so we were still at the beginning of something that was happening that would be good for our family, that we would be helping my mother more and building something more economically stable for her. But she did it. But she trusted no one. She had a great difficulty with people. I don't know what had happened, but she trusted no one. That was difficult for me because I was such an optimist, still am, an idealist. I believe in the goodness of people. She thought I was naive. She often criticized me for my friendships. She felt that I invested more than I should have. And she always sort of felt that there was something transactional in human relations that I didn't. So we had very often different opinions about things. I didn't always agree with my mother's vision of the world, but I think it was her protective streak. But that protective streak became quite controlling sometimes. So it was a battle with my mother to remain, sometimes, not always, she wasn't always difficult, but, and I wasn't always in conflict with her principles, but sometimes she would be really difficult about what I couldn't do. And this became especially difficult after I got engaged because, I was 24, 25 years old, and she was controlling my movements. I was working at the university, and she would tell me, what time are you coming home? And if I wasn't home at 4, she'd be hysterical. What if Idris realizes you've been out? But it was so weird. But I think it was really protecting us, but overly doing that, so that it became restrictions and limitations. There was a fear that, you know, it was difficult with my mum. But she was, you know, she loved us fiercely. And she overcame really all the hardships with great strength. I'm very admirative of my mother now. I wasn't when I was 20, but I'm 70 now, and I look back on a woman 48 years old, alone with 6 children in a new country. We'd only been in Canada 4 years, you know, and she held us together. She maintained the idea that we belonged to each other, strengthened us in our love for each other.
Okay, but we were in Australia, now we are in Canada.
We're in Canada.
How did you go to Canada? Why did you go to Canada?
Well, that's another story of disappointment, actually. We, in 1967 or 8, my father was invited to go to the United States by the Vatra organization. Vatra introduced, and he came back to Australia with this invitation that he was going to come. We were all going to go to Boston, and he was going to take over the publication of the newspaper Dytë, which was established by Fanoli, which had this family connection. So it was decided that we were going to go there. Something happened. I've never understood what. But we suddenly aren't going to Boston, we're going to Toronto. So we go to Toronto, there is no Vatra job, there is no nothing. This is a chapter I'm beginning to do some research on, because I'm looking at the people who were there in the 1960s, and there was the death of one man, Sheiko, who was one of the leaders of Vatra. I think that probably, this is still to be worked out what happened. But we're in Canada. They've taken us from our home, whatever it was, 7 children, and we arrive, and now nothing. So so this is 1969, 1970, and my parents now have to start looking for jobs. My mother found a job as a nurse's assistant, Toronto General Hospital. We, were integrated into the school system. My older sister, who was a brilliant woman, who's still a very brilliant woman, did not continue her university education because suddenly we needed someone. There was nothing. Economically, it got worse. So then my father found a job. Don't really remember what the first one was, but I think it was a cook in a brewery or something. And my sister was working also with I don't remember what she was doing. I should ask her, but it's a long time ago. Anyway, the 3 of them were working. I finished high school there. I did my last year of high school there and went then to the university. My sister married. A year later, she was married, 2 years later. It was not a happy time, huh? It was a very difficult time. And then the worst of it is my father is diagnosed with cancer, and it really goes haywire. It really goes haywire. And through it all, we kind of stuck it through, and we turned something that was really difficult into something good, because we are a good family, and we love each other very much. So, and I took responsibility. I have to give myself credit. I was, through my years of university, I worked full time and kept a full-time position at work at university. I didn't keep my first class honors, but I got my degrees. And I also had 2 professors who were really my cheerleaders, one of them has passed away. The other one I continue to be friends with today. And they helped me get through those difficult last years of university because, you know, my father was dying and I spent more time at the hospital than I did in my classroom, you know. But yeah, we went to Canada in 1970. In 74, he was dead. And my mother was alone. And we were in an economic situation that was very, very, very difficult.
Your grandfather passed away?
My grandfather passed away after my father. My grandfather, my mother's father.
Yeah.
I was married and had children by the
So he was there with you in Canada?
No. He was in Australia. We came to Canada on our own. We were just my mother, my father, and the 7 of us.
Were they from Kosovo too?
My grandfather, no. My mother's grandfather. My mother is from the far south of Albania, Scrapari. We had the north, the very far north, right near the Serbian border and right near the Greek border. We kept saying we were the embodiment of the ethnic Albanian ideal. You know, had the two extremes. You know.
Now the question is, what kind of Albanian do you speak? Gagnisht or Tosk?
When I got married, I spoke mostly Tosk, faulty. But over the years, it's evolved, and now it's something else. And then it's evolved again, because, you know, when I got married, Idris was obviously from the north. He spoke a very strong, you know, gig kind of tonality, intonation and vocabulary, structure, grammatical structure. So I incorporated that into my own way of speaking because it was the local and it influences you, right? And then, of course, Albania opens up and you're meeting intellectuals, poets, journalists, archaeologists, you know, politicians, all who have been educated in the literary Albanian. And so you make an effort to communicate. You know, I remember the first time we went to Shahin Kadare's home. His daughter was very young then, and Idris and I were talking to Shahin. And she chimes in with, "What are these people? Kosovar?" Like, you know, with the accent. So slowly, it's evolved into something again else. You know, I mean, I think my Albanian now is richer. That's for sure. Vocabulary-wise, it's much richer. But I think what happens is when I'm with the people, you know, who I think I adapt. You know, I adapt according to the situation. On Sunday we had we celebrated the 40th anniversary of our radio program, Jana Shippers. I was one of the founding members, the only woman, and of course I was there, and I prepared something because I was emotional about. I knew I would be, because there were very few of the original team are still alive. And so it was a lot of nostalgia as well as pride that I was feeling, but a lot of nostalgia, including my husband. He was the first editorialist and he wasn't there. And I thought I'd do an editorial, you know, but I did it with the literary Albanian because this was something that I thought was going to be almost like a historical thing. So it had to be spoken well. So I choose, you know, but I can do it. That tells you how improved my Albanian is, you know? Yeah.